Officer Megan Raskin thought she was dealing with just another excuse-making suspect, until the man she pulled over exposed her lies with a Secret Service badge and a packed courtroom watching. "You can't be serious," Officer Megan Raskin said with a smirk, loud enough for the jury to hear. She shook her head like she'd heard it all before. The courtroom, packed with people waiting for the next case to be called, had gone dead silent. All eyes were on the tall, well-dressed black man standing behind the witness stand, his voice calm, posture unshaken. His name was Darren Cole, 32. Crisp grey suit, steady tone. From the outside, he didn't look like trouble. Yet to Raskin, that's exactly what he'd been the moment she pulled him over on the outskirts of Valdosta, Georgia, 3 weeks earlier. Now here they were, courtroom 4B, Tuesday morning. The judge, Honorable Brenda Leary, leaned in slightly, watching it unfold without saying a word. Megan had already given her statement. Quick, almost casual, like this wasn't worth more than a few minutes of the court's time. Darren's car had illegal tint, she said. He refused to cooperate. He acted suspicious. He escalated the situation. And now that he was explaining his side, calmly, precisely, she couldn't even hide the amusement in her face. "You're telling me," Megan interrupted, arms crossed, "you were just driving through on some business?" Her tone added the quotation marks. The courtroom chuckled. Someone in the back coughed hard, covering a laugh, but Darren didn't flinch. He waited for silence, and when he had it, he opened his mouth again. "I was working," he said. "Federal business. Ongoing surveillance tied to a cybercrime investigation." Megan opened her mouth, maybe to say something else. But Darren reached inside his suit jacket. For half a second, Megan took a step back. Everyone in the room noticed. From an inside pocket, he pulled out a thin leather badge holder. Quietly, without flair, he flipped it open and held it up for the judge to see. "United States Secret Service, Field Operations, Cyber Fraud Task Force," he said. "Badge number 4291837. The silence cracked into whispers. The court officer near the judge's bench shifted in his seat. A few people turned to look at Megan. She didn't speak. Her face, which had been resting in that lazy grin, had gone stone still. Judge Leary motioned toward the bailiff, who stepped over, looked at the badge, then nodded to the judge. A beat passed. Then the judge leaned forward slightly and said, "Ms. Raskin, would you like to respond?" Megan blinked. Her lips parted just enough to start forming words, but nothing came out. "I was not at liberty to disclose my status during the stop," Darren said, his voice never rising. "That's procedure when you're undercover, but what I can tell you now, under oath, is that I was monitoring a suspicious money transfer pattern that had just flagged accounts connected to South Georgia." A quiet gasp from someone in the jury. "I was instructed to stay in the area and observe," he continued. "I drove a nondescript rental, windows factory tinted. And within 5 minutes of parking across from the strip mall, I was approached and questioned without explanation. She asked where I was from, why I was in that neighborhood, why I had an out-of-state plate. She didn't run my ID until after searching my car." He stopped talking, looked at the jury, then over at the judge. "I told her I was working." She laughed. All eyes were back on Megan. She was now standing straighter, not speaking, her eyes moving between the judge and the prosecutor. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man named Charles Givens, looked like someone had just whispered something sharp in his ear. He leaned into his mic and said, "Your Honor, may we request a short recess before proceeding?" But the judge didn't respond immediately. She was still watching Darren, maybe trying to process what had just happened. And in that moment, in front of everyone, the balance shifted. What started as just another courtroom formality had turned into something no one expected. But what really happened that day on the roadside? Before the badge, before the silence, before the courtroom ever knew his name, Darren remembered everything. It was just past 5 p.m. when Darren pulled off Interstate 75 near Hahira, a small stretch of town that most folks only saw through their rearview mirror. The sun was still high, casting long shadows over the quiet parking lot outside a gas station and dollar store. Darren had parked near the edge, facing the street. He was in a silver Nissan Altima, fresh off a rental lot in Jacksonville. Nothing flashy, just another car in a sea of southern dust. He'd been assigned to watch for a suspected courier, someone involved in laundering digital currency through physical drop-offs at small-town ATMs. His job wasn't to intervene, just to observe. Discreet. But before he could even pull out his phone to take a surveillance note, he noticed a patrol SUV circling the lot. It passed once. Then again, slower. Darren didn't react. It wasn't his first time being watched. And then the lights came on. The SUV swung in front of him at an angle, blocking him in. The door popped open fast. A tall white officer stepped out, hand resting near her belt, not on her weapon, but close enough to make a point. Her name tag read, "Raskin. You live around here?" she asked as she approached. "No, ma'am. Just working." Darren replied, polite, measured. "Working? Doing what?" He glanced at her. This was always the game. Say too little, you're hiding something. Say too much, you're arrogant. "I'm just observing some activity in the area." Her eyes narrowed. "Observing?" She took a step closer. "Step out of the car for me." He sighed quietly, putting his hands where she could see them. "Is there a reason, officer?" "Your tint's illegal. You can't even see into the front seat from the side. That's a safety issue." Darren looked ahead. The tint was factory standard. He'd checked the specs. But he didn't argue. She asked for license and registration, then asked who the car belonged to, then asked why someone from Florida was driving a car in a Georgia parking lot, then asked if he was lost, and then, after 5 minutes, she asked if she could search the vehicle. "Am I being detained?" Darren asked. "You're acting suspicious." He chuckled under his breath. That word always came up. "Ma'am, I'd prefer not to have my vehicle searched without cause." She stepped back, called something into her radio. 2 more squad cars showed up within minutes. They patted him down, took everything out of his pockets. A phone, wallet, pen, a half-crumpled receipt from a gas station in Lake City. She held the receipt up like it was evidence. "You military?" one of the younger officers asked. "No." "You law enforcement?" "I didn't say that." "You got a badge?" Darren looked at him. "I'm not required to answer that." Megan Raskin didn't like that. She started circling the vehicle like it was a trap ready to spring. She leaned her head in through the open window. "No drugs, no weapons, no smell," she muttered. "But something's off here." Darren stood still, hands still where she could see them, sweat gathering at the base of his neck. He didn't flinch when she opened the trunk without asking, just kept watching, knowing that anything, one wrong breath, could shift the whole thing sideways. After 20 minutes, they gave up. No ticket, no apology, not even a "have a nice day." "Keep your nose clean," she said, tossing his wallet back to him. "And maybe don't hang around places where you don't belong." Darren said nothing. Just took the wallet, got back in the car, and drove off without a word. He'd filed the internal report later that night, not through regular channels, but through the contact line assigned for federal agents experiencing interference. He hadn't planned to press it. His job wasn't to make noise. But when he got the court summons 2 weeks later, saying Megan had filed a formal citation against him for refusal to cooperate and vehicle code violation, he knew it was personal now. She'd tried to flip the story, paint him as the problem, but she had no idea who she was dealing with or how many people had seen what she did that day. Darren Cole didn't look like the kind of man who blended in, but that's exactly what made him good at his job. At 6'2" with sharp features and a voice that carried without needing to shout, he knew how to hold a room when he wanted to. But most of the time, he made sure people didn't remember him at all. That's the first thing they teach you at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe. Presence is a tool, not a spotlight. Darren had spent the last 8 years in the Secret Service's Cyber Fraud Task Force, working primarily out of their Tampa office. His specialty wasn't bodyguard detail or counterfeiting. It was digital trails, cryptocurrency theft, laundering rings, and the growing black market web of fraud syndicates trading in stolen data like it was gold. He wasn't what most people pictured when they thought Secret Service. He didn't wear sunglasses or whisper into an earpiece. Most days he was in jeans, sitting in a beige minivan outside a run-down strip mall, waiting to see who was stupid enough to think they were untraceable. His mission that week in Georgia was simple. Observe a suspected courier named Anton Levesque, flagged for multiple ATM deposits tied to a known laundering network operating between Miami and Birmingham. The idea was to track the middlemen, not scare them off. No arrests, no confrontation, just a quiet record of who showed up where and when. Darren had only been in Valdosta for 2 days when Officer Raskin pulled him over. It threw everything off. Not just the operation, but the principle. He'd kept his badge out of sight on purpose. It wasn't just policy. It was protection. In his line of work, the wrong person knowing who you are can get you followed, exposed, or worse. But being treated like a criminal for doing his job, that still cut deep. It brought him back to something his father once told him in high school after a local cop accused him of stealing his own bike. Doesn't matter what badge you wear if they decide they don't like the look of you. His father, Clarence Cole, had worked logistics for Upes in Gainesville for 27 years. Never missed a day. Never raised his voice. But the world had still found ways to remind him what it thought of black men who stood too tall or talked too clear. Darren didn't like talking about that night in Hahira. Not with his supervisor. Not with his girlfriend Simone. Not even with himself. But the report had to be filed. And when that citation showed up in his mailbox, he knew silence wasn't an option anymore. His supervisor, Special Agent Carla Drummond, called him immediately. "She actually filed on you?" she asked, her voice tight. She did. Carla let out a slow exhale. "Want us to intervene?" Darren shook his head. "No, I want to handle it in court. You sure?" "I want them to see it happen. I want it to be on record." So he prepared his statement. Pulled every detail he could legally share. Surveillance logs, GPS data, even the time-stamped photo of Raskin standing near his trunk, her hand on the lid. His badge would come out only if necessary, and after she'd already tried to discredit him. He wasn't there for revenge. He wasn't looking for headlines. He just wanted the truth to land where it belonged. And when that moment came, when her laughter echoed through the courtroom and the smirk spread across her face, Darren didn't get angry. He simply opened the badge holder. Because that's the other thing they teach you early in the service. When you've got the truth, you don't have to raise your voice to be heard. But he wasn't the only one ready to speak, because there were others who saw what happened that day, and they were about to make themselves known. The court reconvened 20 minutes later. The judge's face was unreadable. Prosecutor Charles Givens had returned with a legal pad filled with fresh notes, flipping pages with an urgency that didn't match his usual steady rhythm. Megan Raskin, for the first time that morning, looked uncomfortable in her own skin. Darren sat quietly at the witness stand, his hands folded. His badge had already been verified by the bailiff and logged into the court record. No theatrics, no speeches, just facts. "Mr. Cole," the judge began, "you've confirmed your identity and provided documentation of your employment with the United States Secret Service. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you were conducting federal surveillance in Lowndes County at the time of the incident?" "I was." She paused. "Why didn't you identify yourself as an agent during the stop?" "Because I wasn't required to, and because doing so would have compromised an open investigation," he said. "We're instructed not to reveal credentials unless absolutely necessary for safety or legal compliance." The judge nodded, then turned toward Officer Raskin. "Officer," she said slowly, "were you aware that the person you cited was a federal agent?" Megan shifted. "No, ma'am." "Did he give you any indication that he was law enforcement?" "He was evasive," Megan said quickly. "He was vague. He didn't cooperate." Darren spoke up calmly. "I provided my license. I complied with her instructions. I simply didn't consent to a warrantless search." Megan's jaw moved slightly, like she was biting back something. Givens cleared his throat. "Your Honor, we'd like to request the opportunity to question the witness in more detail regarding the events of that day." The judge granted it. Darren recounted everything. The patrol car circling twice, the aggressive approach, the unnecessary backup, the search without consent, his refusal to answer certain questions. The way Megan leaned into the car and muttered to herself, her parting words, "Don't hang around places you don't belong." The words landed like a slap. In the back row, a woman in a dark green blouse raised her hand. She was called forward. Her name was Carla McKinney. She worked at the family-owned nail salon across from the gas station. She remembered that day clearly. "I saw the whole thing," she said. "I was standing at the window with my co-worker. We saw him parked, not doing anything, just sitting there. Then the cop pulled up fast, like something bad had already happened." "Did you witness any aggressive behavior from Mr. Cole?" "No," she said. "He never even raised his voice. She was the one walking around his car like she was looking for something to find wrong." A man came forward next. Tim Sorensen, manager of the nearby barbecue joint. "She didn't recognize him, so she treated him like a problem. I've seen that before," he said. "Objection," Megan's attorney barked. But it didn't stop the moment from sticking. Piece by piece, Megan's version unraveled. Not because Darren accused her of something dramatic, but because the facts stood firm and other people backed them up. Her smirk never came back. She looked smaller now, not physically, but somehow quieter. Givens turned to her and asked, "Did you tell Mr. Cole he was somewhere he didn't belong?" "I don't remember saying that," Megan replied stiffly. Darren didn't blink. "You said it," he said plainly. A pause. Then the judge looked to Megan again. "Officer Raskin, do you still stand by the citation you filed?" Megan hesitated. Her attorney whispered something, but it was too late. Everyone was watching. The jury, the clerk, the public benches filled with locals who had seen her name in the papers more than once. She finally answered, "No, Your Honor, I withdraw it." But the damage was already done, and what came next was out of her hands. 2 weeks passed. The investigation into Officer Raskin was now public. The Valdosta Police Department, under pressure from both internal review boards and mounting community attention, issued a formal statement. "We take these matters seriously and are committed to transparency." That didn't mean much to Darren. He'd heard similar lines before, neatly worded, intentionally vague. But something was different this time. People were talking, not in hashtags or headlines, but in lunchrooms, barbershops, waiting rooms. Not just about Darren, but about how often people got profiled, how often silence won. The part that stuck with most folks wasn't even the badge. It was how calm he'd stayed in court, how he let the facts speak when everything else around him was designed to twist them. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't thrown accusations. He simply told the truth and watched it do what truth often does. It made people uncomfortable. That week, Darren received a message from the teacher who'd come forward after the hearing. His name was Julian Withers. 45. Teaches American history at a local high school. Grew up in that same Georgia county. "I never filed a complaint," Julian said, when they met for coffee one morning in Tifton. "Didn't think anyone would listen, but when I saw your face on the news, I thought, damn, maybe now they have to." They talked for over an hour, not just about Raskin, but about the weight people carried every time they got behind the wheel. About how it wasn't just fear, it was exhaustion. Constantly needing to prove that you belonged, that you weren't a threat, that you weren't trying to get away with something. Darren listened more than he spoke. That's what he did best. Read people, understand what they weren't saying. Julian wasn't just thanking him. He was handing him something heavier, hope wrapped in frustration. A few days later, Darren received another message. This one from a woman named Rhonda Bailey. She worked part-time at the city clerk's office and had helped transcribe courtroom sessions for over 15 years. "I was there that day," she wrote. "When you pulled out that badge, something in that room shifted. You didn't shout. You didn't even blink, but we all felt it." She ended her note with a sentence that stayed with him. "Sometimes you don't need to fight back. You just need to stand still long enough for the truth to catch up." By the end of the month, Officer Raskin had officially resigned. No press conference, no statement, Just an internal memo leaked through back channels confirming her departure. The department insisted her resignation was unrelated to ongoing personnel matters. But again, nobody bought that. Darren never gloated. He didn't need to. When asked later if he felt justice had been served, he said, "Not fully, but it's a start." In the quiet weeks that followed, he returned to his cases. More fraud rings, more surveillance, but something had shifted, not in how he did his job, but in how people looked at him when he walked into the room. He was still the same agent, still the same calm voice, still the man who didn't flinch, but now people listened. And that mattered. Because when systems are slow to change, sometimes what it takes isn't noise, it's clarity. A refusal to accept the lie, a willingness to wait, and when the time comes, to speak with precision. And somewhere out there, someone else was about to be pulled over, questioned, doubted, maybe even charged. But maybe this time, they'd remember Darren Cole and realize they didn't have to shrink when the world tried to make them smaller. A month later, Darren stood outside a federal office building in Tampa, watching the city lights blink beneath a heavy Florida dusk. He wasn't there for a case. No stakeouts, no targets, just reflection. In his right hand he held a thin envelope, postmarked from someone named Andrew Morales, a young man from Tennessee who'd read about Darren's case online. The letter was handwritten, shaky in parts. "I used to think people like me would never get taken seriously. But when I saw your story, I realized maybe it's not about shouting louder. It's about knowing you have the right to be heard in the first place." Darren folded it slowly and slid it back into the envelope. He'd received others like it. Notes from fathers, sons, and grandmothers. From people who'd been stopped, questioned, dismissed, who had stories they'd never shared until now. What connected them wasn't anger. It was the quiet dignity of those who had learned to carry themselves through judgment, through stares, through silence. And somehow, Darren had given that dignity a voice. He didn't ask for the spotlight. He didn't want to be a headline. But the moment Megan Raskin smirked in that courtroom and laughed at the idea that he could possibly be telling the truth, something cracked open. She didn't laugh because he was wrong. She laughed because she believed the system would take her side, that the courtroom, like the street, would tilt in her favor, but it didn't. Not that time. And maybe that's where change begins. Not in policies or press releases, but in those rare, raw moments when truth makes people stop and look at themselves. People will forget Megan Raskin's name. They'll forget the courtroom layout, the transcript, the technicalities. But they won't forget Darren Cole. Not because he was dramatic, not because he exposed a scandal, but because he did something far more rare. He told the truth. And he waited. The lesson? You don't need a title to deserve respect. You don't need a uniform to be believed. And no one has the right to laugh at your truth just because they think they already know your story. There are thousands of people like Darren. Quiet professionals. People just trying to do their jobs, carry their names with pride, live without fear of being misread. They deserve more than just tolerance. They deserve recognition, dignity, and space. So the next time someone assumes, interrupts, or judges, pause. Think about Darren Cole. Think about how quickly things can flip, and who ends up exposed when the facts rise to the surface. Because truth has a way of arriving, even when no one's ready for it. And if this story made you feel something, anger, surprise, respect, maybe even hope, don't let it end here. Share it. Talk about it. Question what needs questioning. And if you want to hear more real stories that challenge what we think we know, subscribe and stay with us. Because the world changes one truth at a time, and your voice matters in that change.